All right. Thank you both. It's always great to hear the way you guys read through it so well. So thank you. But this whole section, and we did actually cover through verse 40 last time. I had to remind myself of where exactly we were at. But it's two parables that are linked together by a question in the middle. So we covered the first one, verses 35 through 40. But really, in order to fully understand the second one, you need to remember what's in the first one. So just as a very quick review of 25 through 40, who are the servants in this parable? Who's that represent? Us as Christians. And who is this master? The Lord. And what is the overall theme? That the servants need to be what? Ready all the time, waiting for the Lord to do what? To return, which is talking about Jesus coming back for final judgment. So we are to be ready because, and then what we really covered 2 weeks ago, last time I was teaching, was the thief in the night concept, and we don't know the hour when it will happen. I was having a discussion actually a little bit briefly with my mom yesterday about this. We don't know the hour, and we looked at a number of the verses. And really, actually, this is a good question or a good thought that has, at the classes I'm taking, has been reiterated multiple times to me. But how many times does the Bible have to say something in order for it to be true? Once. But there are times when the Bible says something more than once. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't be true if it didn't say it more than once, but it's useful for us to really help to reinforce to ourselves and to others, how true it must be if it says it. So we looked in the Gospels, we looked in Paul's letters, Peter's letters, and we didn't read in Revelation, but in John's Revelation, they all talk about the thief in the night and being ready because the hour is not known. So that takes us to verse 41, and this is where Judy picked up the reading for us this morning. So who is it that asks a question in verse 41? Peter. And for those of us who have been studying the Bible for a long time, which I think is most of the people in here, we kind of understand that Peter's personality was kind of one to often be out there, be asking questions. So this is totally in character that, he jumps in with a question for Jesus. And then also, this is not out of character, but when Jesus is asked this question, does he provide a direct answer? No. Very rarely do we see Jesus just saying yes or no, or a simple one-word answer. How does Jesus like to teach? Parables. And, one of the reasons that he may have done this is because parables make us think. What is it that he's meaning to say? And it might be more impactful than just hearing a passing answer and moving on. It also gives examples that we can think about and picture in our mind and really connect. And then that word picture becomes a mental image that helps us remember the scenario. So Jesus answers a question about a parable with another parable, which is just as long or maybe longer than the first one that he gave. So what was the question that Peter asked? Verse 41. Terry? Right. Who does this apply to? And, jumping ahead, what would we say the answer is? I heard somebody say everyone. So it's not just applying to the apostles, but Peter doesn't answer that or Jesus doesn't answer that directly. But really, Peter's focus was on who is this referring to, but Jesus's answer is less about who are the servants and more about what about the servants, what quality. Okay, so faithful and doing what they're supposed to do. So faith here we can see is directly tied to actions, right? The actions that they take. Terry, I saw. Were you going to add something to that? Yeah. So it's less about who you are. Okay, it's more about what you do, about what Jesus has taught. And so that's where we go through this section here, verses 42 through 48. And what we'll see is there are three types of responses that Jesus answered or Jesus gives. So those servants who were told to be ready, what did they do about it? Okay, and then we can draw application from those. So if we look at verses 42 through 44, especially 43 and 44, what type of servant is described in these verses? So it says, "Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will make him a ruler over all he has." So what kind of servant is this one? One who does what he was told to do. Exactly. Even if the master is not there, right? He's going to know what happened, because he'll be able to see the results. So this is the faithful servant. Okay. So what happens in these verses? What does Jesus say is going to happen to the servants who are faithfully doing the master's will when the master returns? Okay. Put in charge of some possessions, and we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper. But in the first word in verse 43, what's the verse that, or the word that Jesus uses there? Servant will be blessed. Does everybody's verse say that? Oh, it'll be good for that servant. Okay, so it'll be good. That servant will be blessed. Same idea. Okay, so and the specific blessing is just what Judy mentioned. He'll be a ruler over all he has. That's the New King James. And what's the wording that yours says? Put him in charge of all his possessions. Okay, so this blessing, this good thing that's happening to the man, it's twofold. Okay, one has to do with having something, possessions, right? And then the second has to do not just with having possessions, but having what? Responsibility. He's in charge. We might call that authority. Okay, so he's going to, he's not just going to have the blessing of the possessions. And like I said, the New King James uses the word ruler. So he's going to have some level of authority. And we see this in other similar parables where we can see, given somebody who's faithful in a little will be given more, and so forth. Okay. I'll pause there and just see if there's any comments. Ed? Okay. So that's you're leading right to where I'm going. So, and this is what I think part of the idea of a parable is. So let's think about this. What are these possessions? There are some in this world who would teach that if you do what God's will is, that you'll get material blessings. We may call that the prosperity gospel. I don't think that's what Jesus is referring to here, and it doesn't sound like that's what you think either. So do you have any? Okay. So this is my thought process, and a lot of times when I'm studying, I kind of write down these questions and I try to answer them for myself. So we'll see if my logic works for others, and you guys can tell me what you think. So possessions of the earth. Okay, Jesus is the master, right? When Jesus was here on this earth, what possessions did he have? None at all. But we know that Jesus was incarnated as a man, but he's also what? God. So he went and as God, what possessions does God have? Everything, all of heaven and earth, right? So really all possessions belong to the master. So even in this example of being a steward or a servant, they're in charge of these things, but they're not really the true owner. The master is the owner. And so it is with us. While we're here on this earth, we're given stewardship over things, but we're here for a time and then we're gone, and the things we have go into somebody else's care. Really, everything that we have comes from God and ultimately belongs to Him anyway. So all of the possessions in heaven and earth belong to Jesus, and I think we certainly can think of examples throughout Scripture that say that. What authority does Jesus have? Think of the Great Commission in Matthew 28. I heard it a few places here. All authority. All authority where? In heaven and on earth, right? So Jesus has all authority. All of these possessions belong to the Lord. But here on earth, okay, so just thinking all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, what did God give to man? What did He ask Adam and Eve and then all of the rest of the generations? W look like to take care of the garden. Okay, and there's multiple verses throughout there that you can see. Dominion, which is another word we would use for power, authority, is given to mankind to do what? Take care of the earth, the plants, the animals, to rule over the earth, if you want to use that word. There's different ways to look at this, but to take care of things. Okay, so the commands given by God to Adam were to take care of the garden and then to be fruitful and multiply. So the dominion over the earth is given to mankind in Genesis and then following throughout the Bible. But I want to ask this next question. So, in generalities, how has mankind used our authority, our dominion in the earth? Unfortunately, not very well in many cases. So definitely good. We can see the good, right? But we also see a lot of times where poor stewardship has taken place. Okay, so all of this is to say, what is this idea of being a ruler over all that God has have to do with? So we're going to look at a few verses, but hopefully this is starting to help us think that we're to take care of the things that we have here on this earth, and then we will have blessings in heaven, and we've talked about some of those, and we'll look at some verses that kind of help us think about that. I may not be able to fully answer it in everybody's mind, but we'll keep thinking about it. But before we look at some verses, any thoughts so far? Chuck? Right. Selfishness, greed, right? So if we or if others around us, if mankind is only thinking about themselves when they're taking care of it, then they're not really thinking about God. They're not thinking about others, which is part of obeying God, is taking care of others. Yeah, we need to think beyond just our reach, our sphere of influence. And I mean, we need to think about that sphere of influence, but how it affects the bigger picture. Any other comments? Oh, I think so. mankind is possession oriented quite often. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If you have something I want, then I'm going to fight you for it. Right. Yeah, we can see some of that even at work in our world today, can't we? So let's look at a few verses. You probably have them written down there. Luke 19, 1 Corinthians 4, and Revelation 3 have to do with this section. If somebody turns a few pages to Luke 19 and can read verses 11 through 27 for us. Anybody who gets there is welcome to read. Okay, so just take note of that verse. Chuck, Chuck, can you read verse 17 again for us?
Well done, my good servant, the master replied, because you have been trustworthy in a small matter, take charge of 10 cities.
Okay.
The second came and said, Sir, your mind has earned 5 more. His master answered, we take charge of 5 cities. Then another servant came and said, Sir, here is your money. I have kept your paid away in a heap of cloth. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out of what you did and put in and repeat what you did. But his master replied, I will judge you by your own words. You wicked servant. You knew that I am a hard man, take out of what did not put in and repeat which and repeating what I did not sow. Why then did you put my money on deposit so that when I come back, I could have collected it with interest? Then he said to those standing by, take this money away and from them and give it to the ones who have said
Through 27.
Sir, they said, he already has 10. He replied, I tell you that to everyone who has more will be given, but for the one who has nothing, even what they will have will be taken away. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me.
Okay. So, very similar to the parable of the talents, Jesus says this kind of thing more than once. These 3 servants, they were given different amounts based on their abilities. Okay. Some who were given more more was expected of them. This is also part of where we get this idea. Too much has been given, much is expected. And we see that more authority is given to the people after they do what they're supposed to the servants after they do what they're supposed to. So having charge over it, that's that same idea. And then the one who didn't do anything with maybe somebody only has 1 talent, 1 ability, 1 mina, but you need to do something with it. That's what God expects. So that servant was punished. So just kind of a second example here of this teaching of Jesus. Any comment on that one before we go to the next one? So the next 2 are short readings. Thank you, Chuck, for taking the long one. 1 Corinthians 4, if somebody could read verses 1 and 2.
So then ought to regard us as servants of Christ, and as those entrusted with the secret things of God. Now it is required that those who have been given the trust must prove faithful.
Okay, thank you. And so this verse here says, stewards of the secrets of God or the mysteries of God. I forgot to mention even with the last parable. So parables are an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. So if we only took away that we should be good stewards of our physical things, which may be true, we're missing the larger point. It's not just talking about earthly possessions, it's talking about heavenly things. So here, we should consider ourselves as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. So the things that we are taking care of are for God. But then again, it's required that the stewards are found faithful. So here we're talking about the faithful steward, the faithful servant. Anything else on that one? All right. So in Revelation chapter 3, let's look at verses 19 through 22. 3 verses there. Revelation 3:19 through 22.
Therefore be jealous and behold, I stand at the door and knock. No one should let me into the door. I will bring them and bind them and see you.
All right, thank you. So here we see a picture of, Jesus in heaven at the end, and he's sitting on his throne in heaven. Verse 21 says, "To him who overcomes, he will also do what?" So this is the idea of this faithful servant will also share in what? My throne. So, how are we going to sit on Jesus's throne or God's throne? That's a hard concept for me to think, well, I'm not going to be a ruler in heaven the way Jesus is, but in some fashion, we're going to share in his blessings. We're going to be there in heaven with him. So he has all power, all authority, all dominion. He's over all possessions, all things material that we have in this world. And we will share in that with Jesus at the end if we're faithful to the end. So exactly how all of that looks, I can't answer every nuance of it, but hopefully we start to have this picture in our mind. Go ahead, Ed.
Jesus himself was given things, and he said to his Father,
Mm-hmm.
God,
Yep.
saying that he has kept all that he's given.
Right.
Speaking not of any earthly things, but of the people that he was himself.
Right.
So that's the faithful things
Mm-hmm.
that they none of them were lost.
Yeah.
In the way
That
that
does.
what it is given.
That's a great point, Ed. And our things that we're stewarding in this earth aren't always necessarily money. They're not necessarily things. We have time. We have people who we influence. We have our families. We may have kids. We may have work in the church that we're stewarding. And so those were the things that Jesus had, and he was worried about the people who he had been given charge over. And sometimes that's what it is for us as well. That's a great point. Okay. I'll start asking a couple questions about the next section, and then we'll dig into it next time. But so we talked about the faithful servant in verses 42 through 44. The next type of servant is in verses 45 through 47. The servant that says in his heart, "My master is delaying his coming," and he begins to beat the male and female servants, eat and drink and be drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour he is not aware, and will cut him in two and appoint him a portion with the unbelievers. Okay, so this is the next type of servant. I'll just ask for today, what type of servant is this? Is this a faithful servant? No. How would we describe this servant? Selfish. That's a great word. Any other? Can't be trusted. Any others? Unfaithful. That's another great word. I would even venture to say disobedient, and it from the beatings that are happening and so forth. I would say willfully disobedient, even kind of malicious, mean-spirited. Okay, so we went from the obedient servant. Next, we'll talk about the disobedient servant, and then we'll find out as we go. There may be two different kinds of disobedient servants, but the one we're going to talk about next is the willfully disobedient one. All right, final thought. Thank you guys for your participation. We'll prepare for worship.